So this story comes from Washington State. It's about an unidentified victim who was shot down by a police officer. This person was having a mental health crisis, a mental health emergency. And so an officer with the Pulaski Police Department, who was also unidentified, shows up to the scene and guns down this man who has a clear mental health problem. You know, it is becoming a very, very common thing. Whereas if you call the police on someone who's having a mental health emergency, you might as well just be saying you want that person dead, because that's what's happening more times than not. So let's get into this story. So on Friday, there were reports that a man was jumping on vehicles and trying to get into another vehicle, which is, I will say, it is peculiar behavior. But the man was also reportedly shouting things and just clearly having a mental health issue. So the officers arrived, and shortly after, officers told dispatch that shots had been fired by an officer. So shortly after, so this man who there's no reports that he had a gun or a weapon or any of that. Shortly after the officers arrive, he ends up dead. What other job is like this? What other job can you show up in, and shortly after you show up, you can kill a mentally ill person, and somehow a country sees that as okay? You got a whole cult called Blue Lives Matter who will support you no matter what you do, and yet in the same breath they wonder why no one likes police officers. They wonder why people think that police officers are less than stellar. They wonder why people see the badge and see it as a symbol of oppression. And yet when someone who is mentally ill gets killed by a police officer, they make every excuse and yet wonder why in the same breath no one likes cops. You know, really, when it boils down to it, it's not so much that people hate cops. It's that the fans of police officers are like cowboy fans. They're the most obnoxious, most disingenuous, most bullshitting people you've ever seen in your life. And I guarantee you, I look forward to someone trying their best to justify this story. Because that's what I've come to expect from Blue Lives Matter. And people who justify death on the regular, I have zero respect for. Zero. So this story goes to show you that, once again, if you know somebody who's having a mental health crisis, do not call the cops. Because if you call the cops, you clearly want that person dead. And if you don't want the person dead and you still call the cops, you must live under a freaking rock. You must not be aware of what cops do to mentally ill people. Seriously.